Welcome to the Thrive Show, where we offer you practical advice that can be implemented into your daily spiritual lives to help you build a thriving home and a thriving sphere. Thanks for joining us.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Thrive Show. Today I am joined by my favorite person, Sarah. You say hi. There.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about how we can thrive in our finances. And this is such a big topic, and we're really passionate about it. And so we're going to try and make this nice and concise for you, because this is something we could talk about for a very long time. But let's start with this, because what we've noticed in counseling and just our own experiences is that our upbringing has a big impact on how we think about finances, how we operate in finances, and like just how our whole world is kind of shaped by our upbringing, at least initially, and then we kind of sometimes have to unlearn things. So Sarah, would you mind sharing just a little bit about your upbringing and finances and, what that looked like for you?
Sure. So growing up, when we were little, I'm the baby of 4, and we all had I think they were old peanut jars or something with a screw top lid with a slit cut out at the top, and that was our banks. And so we had, we would have allowance, we would have to do chores at the house, and every week we would get, it probably was $3 or something each week. And I did not grow up in a Christian home, so we didn't tithe or anything like that, but I was supposed to save some, and then I could keep some to spend. And so from a very early age, I don't even remember when we started, I always remember doing that. We would always be saving. I didn't open up a bank account until I was in high school when I actually got my first job. But I can remember just knowing how to manage money, saving and spending. And then when I had my account and my first job, I was still same practices, putting money aside in the savings account. And I can remember the banker one time was amazed at how in just a year or two I was able to save $2,000 in my savings. And she's like, I don't think I've ever met a high schooler who has saved that much money. And so it probably trained me to be less of a spender. I even to this day struggle with spending the money, even when it's just gifted to me or whatever.
Yes, you do.
Yep. But it was something that really was ingrained in me, which I'll let you talk about your upbringing first. But it was funny when we were engaged and approaching our wedding, how differently we approached finances even then, and especially with my savings account that I brought into that marriage.
Well, and but some of the details that you didn't go into, but I find it interesting, is whenever you wanted to buy something as a teenager, you usually didn't ask your mom for any help with that. You usually just kind of did
Pretty
it yourself.
Much. Yeah, I think the big things, with school, something that was a requirement, that was really big ticket item, my mom would do that. But those were, kind of few and far between. But other than if I wanted to, I paid for my own gas, I paid for my car, the payments on that. If I wanted to go out with friends, movies, dinner or something, I would pay for that myself. And so it's just, I knew how to manage my money. And even when I moved out, when I was at college, and then also when I got my first apartment, I knew how much I needed to make in order to make it by. That wasn't really something that was taught at an older age. It just was something that was kind of ingrained into me at an early age.
Yeah, and I'm definitely different. I remember I had a savings account, that kind of thing. I don't know when it started, but my mom would consistently put money in there for me, but it wasn't something I always actively was participating in.
I don't think didn't you say you didn't even know what was in it until you
No,
were
I didn't.
an adult?
And even I got some savings bonds from family members, and those were kind of out of sight, out of mind. But growing up for me financially, it was a situation where my mom and stepdad would help me out with, if I wanted to go do something, they would usually pay for that. But I did start working when I was 15. So I did start making money early on, but there was never any intentional kind of training on here's how you manage your money. It was just more I check my bank account, and if I have money, then I'm good to go do whatever I wanted to do. And it was never a real big plan. I was responsible in terms of paying for bills and stuff by the time I was out of the house and all that. But when we got together, we created my way of handling money and your way of handling money. when you're for married people, like you bring those two things together, and it creates this kind of sometimes tension because usually there's a saver and a spender, and someone who's bent towards saving and bent towards spending, and from the beginning of our marriage, I think it was a struggle for us to kind of figure out, or what does this look like to do well? I mean, I remember we were both working full time. We didn't have like crazy good jobs, but were both working full time, and we're making more money than we had ever made, and always kind of feeling like, well, where did all the money go? Because we didn't have a budget at that time. But eventually, we started a thing called a budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can remember when we were engaged and we were basically having to pay for our wedding ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
A couple family members chipped in with a couple of key parts, but for the most part, it was all of us. And so you and I can remember having even those conversations of like, how can we budget for the wedding? Because these things cost things, and you would look at my savings account and you'd be like, what are you talking about? We have this much money. And I'm like, no, it's called savings, not spending.
You were saving it for this.
And so needless to say, we ended up spending the savings, and so we started our marriage basically with no nest egg of anything. And so yeah, it was interesting, and then we weren't budgeting.
Highly don't recommend that.
No, not at all. But yeah, so it was interesting. But I mean, it was maybe a year or maybe less, but I mean maybe close to a year into our marriage when we first started budgeting. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we were kind of advised to do that, and really the spreadsheet that we started then is what we have been using ever since. We've kind of modified it a little bit, but yeah. Yeah,
so we share the things that we're going to share today in terms of thriving in our finances from a state of, or from an experience of, we know what it's like to not do these things, and we also know what it's like to do these things, and we much prefer and much advise to practice these things because it leads to just a better situation. Rather than surviving in your finances, we can thrive in our finances. And like one of the things that we as Christians believe is that God is the giver of all things, including our financial resources that we have. And so that makes us as what the Bible calls stewards, like managers of what God has given to us. I just have a couple of scriptures I want to share to set this up, to talk about it. But Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants," so basically everything, belong to the Lord. So that's what the premise is, that our finances that we have, our possessions, and even our very selves are not our own. They're God's. And He's given it to us to manage for His glory and people's good. And then in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells a story, and it starts like this: "For it is just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. Then he went on a journey. Immediately the man who had received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. In the same way the man with 2 earned 2 more, but the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money." So the rest of the story goes that the manager finds out about this and is not very happy with the one manager who didn't, or the owner found out about these servants, and the one who didn't grow what was given to him or manage it in a way that was good for the master, was not very happy with the servant. And it's a spiritual principle in terms of the parable that Jesus tells, but I think within that it brings about a principle that is important for us to understand as managers, and is that God wants us to manage what He has given to us in a manner that is honoring to Him. And so squandering it or wasting it is not advisable. And so as stewards, it's important, if we're going to manage what's been given to us, to have a plan for what that means. And that's where we both have alluded to it already about budgeting. Can you talk a little bit about just like how we budget? Like we do a couple things that probably make us seem older than we are, but we keep a checkbook, like a register checkbook, and we also keep a spreadsheet that we update every week. Can you talk about like what is on the spreadsheet? Because for somebody who's like watching this, maybe never budgeted, that kind of sounds daunting, and maybe even like constricting. And so, can you talk a little bit about like budgeting and what that does for us?
Yeah. So our budget, the way that we did it, and I mean, there's ways to do budgets. I mean, you don't have to do it exactly this way, but the way that we found that really works for us is we just have an Excel spreadsheet, or what is it? That not Excel, but the
numbers.
Numbers, yeah.
It's a spreadsheet, basically.
Yeah. So we basically have it kind of color coordinated. At the top, we have the income that's coming in, and then we have a midsection where we have all the expenses throughout the month, and then I have them all kind of lined up with
our bills.
The bills that are coming through, and then I have them lined up to where the date in which they're coming through, so we know what to expect moving forward. And then we have another section underneath that is when we first started entertaining the idea of the Dave Ramsey zero-based budget envelope system. We did kind of like a digital. We actually started out with envelopes, but then we ended up just going digital with that. But side note, I recently found those and found that we still had cash tucked away in some of those envelopes. So hey, it pays. But anyway, so getting back to it, we had like a digital envelope kind of section, which would be the things that are not necessarily just like bills that are coming out. It's like, groceries, gas, fund money, things like that may change month to month, and things that we're just choosing extra to put money toward. And then we have a line there, which doesn't look that way, but it's for tithing. So we automatically know when that's coming out, which when we do our budgeting, that's one of the first things that we document on our register, that tithing automatically, it's not a whatever's left over. It is, that comes first. But we have it in a way that we used to, when we first started budgeting, we would, at least when I was budgeting, when I was still just on my own, I would look at what the bills were coming due, and then within that week or the 2 weeks pay period, I would pay it when I got paid. So I would know within there, but I would never kind of even out the weight of, like, let's say my rent that was coming due. That was a lot more expensive than just gas for the week, or for maybe my phone bill or whatever it would be. And so there'd be some paychecks that I felt like I had nothing extra and I was really, really tight. And then I would have other bills that, or paychecks periods that would just seem to be easy, and I'd have so much extra money, so I may spend a lot of it, going out with friends or movies, or going out to eat or something like that. And then throughout the years, we had found that if we kind of looked ahead, figured out how, like, where the large ticket items, the bills come through, we would start saving a little bit, or kind of like divvy that up amongst the paychecks, so that way when it comes due, it kind of all feels even across each paycheck. And so by looking with our spreadsheet what bills we have and when they're coming due, we can kind of plan, okay, we have a big bill coming up here, so why don't we divvy that up with 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, worked with us.
We'll even do this with like saving for a vacation over the course of months. Like, it's just a matter of looking ahead. And, how many times have you reached like the end of the month or the beginning of the month, whichever perspective you want to take, and you're like, I've got no money for groceries or something like that, and it's because we don't do that. Whereas if you start to kind of think, okay, if I get paid weekly, then maybe I can set aside a certain amount for my mortgage or my rent or whatever, so that you're not so bogged down. But budgeting, some people would say, feels too like I'm putting myself in handcuffs, and like I have no freedom.
And for us, that was the complete opposite.
Because a budget is permission to
spend.
To spend, exactly.
Yeah. And knowing, and I think especially for people like me who have a hard time spending in general, if it's within the budget, we already have it planned out to where I know that it's not taking away from something else later that we may need, or to make sure that we're just getting by. I know that I can, without having to like think through it too much, like I can spend it without any care or concern. And so like our last handful of vacations that we've taken, we've paid cash. Like we've had, and we've been able to do that while breathing easy, not having to worry like, how are we going to pay this off when we get back home, things like that. And so we felt when we started budgeting, even though we weren't making more money, it felt like we got a raise. It felt like our money was really working for us, rather than we were just working to gain and acquire like the money just to get by and just to live on. And so it had a complete opposite effect for us, and it really worked.
Yeah, so budgeting, We do a zero-based budget, which is what we would recommend. Basically, you tell every single penny where to go. And obviously, like, once you set that, you can change it, you can adjust it. But we live with a cash kind of like mentality. Debit card. We use a debit card. But we don't take out loans or anything. Like, the only debt we have is our mortgage, which we're looking forward to paying that off. And that is a conviction that we kind of gained over the years through, it started out with the Dave Ramsey plan and just kind of learning about just the nature of debt. And we had a lot of debt. Mm-hmm. And over the course of 6-7 years, we scratched and clawed and paid all that off. I think it ended up being like $60-some thousand when it was all said and done. And that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't budget. Mm-hmm. If we didn't make a plan and tell our money where to go, we noticed that every week, without a budget, it just kind of went where it wanted to. And we were just along for the ride. Now, one thing about budgeting that is hard to get used to, if you're like, okay, budgeting, yeah, I know I need to do that, you're going to have to learn how to, like, it's going to take a few months to dial in. I remember when we went to the grocery store mm-hmm. in the first few months of us budgeting, and you want to talk about that? Because I think you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah. So I did not like going to the grocery store when we were budgeting. I didn't like going, period. But we didn't know how much to set for a grocery budget because we would just go to the grocery store and buy groceries before that. Mm-hmm. And so I think we set an amount like $100. And I don't even remember how long that was supposed to last. Something like that. And so we started out, you would have your phone out with a calculator.
It was just us at the time. So, we didn't have any kids.
We had 3 dogs, I think, at that time. But yeah.
Yeah,
you would have your calculator and I would have like the grocery list that I'd write out, and we'd be going through the store, getting all the things, and we'd have things that we needed, things that we wanted and all that. And it amazed us at how quickly we reached our budget limit, and we still had several items on our list that we couldn't get to. And so we were like playing, okay, now we have to pick up things and put it back just so that we can get the things that we needed. And then we realized, like, okay, we're not even able to get the things we want if we keep doing this. And so figuring out an appropriate budget for our groceries was one thing. And then the frustration of the times where you accidentally hit a button and our entire calculations just cleared out.
That happened a lot.
It did. Halfway through our trip, and we're like, no idea, so we had to start back over. It was a stressful time.
I think we've gotten to the point where we were at the checkout and we were like, oh, we had like too much.
Maybe I just blocked those memories out. I don't know, but it was a rough time. I didn't appreciate having to do that each time, but it was a learning curve.
Proverbs 27:23 says, "Know well the condition of your flock and pay attention to your herds." Now, this is speaking to an agrarian society where your flock and your herds were your resources, your financial well-being. And what we learned is that when we budget, we pay attention to what is going on, and then we're better able to live on mission with our finances and serving God, because we're able to, if we know what's happening, we're able to practice generosity, which is one of the core steps of what we're all about here at FCC. And here's the thing, like 1 Timothy 6:17-19 says, Paul speaking to the pastor Timothy says, "Instruct those who are rich in the present age not to be arrogant or to set their hope on the uncertainty of wealth, but on God, who richly provides us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do what is good, to be rich in good works, and to be generous and willing to share, storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of what is truly life." So we are, in America, in the top 2%-ish of the world's wealthiest people. Like an average American, that's where we are. And generosity is so vitally important. And when we were first in our, starting to go to church and started to follow Jesus, we had no idea anything about generosity. But we eventually started with the conviction of tithing. And it wasn't like we built up to this. We started with dropping whatever we had cash in our pocket in the bucket as it went by, as a mad dash frantic attempt to like not be the person who didn't give in the row at church, to practicing tithing, and then above that as well. And so it's a blessing to be able to give. I think you've got a story from just like practicing generosity and starting to honor God in our finances, and like just the time when we went to Cincinnati and like kind of God showed up, that and we were like very much needing that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so when we first moved to Cincinnati, in order to do that, so the reason why we moved to Cincinnati was because we were going to Cincinnati Christian University. We quit our full-time jobs, moved there, got an apartment there, did not have jobs lined up, and we still had 1 month, I think it was like a whole month before school started. And in order to get by, we were going to take out, like max out our loans, student loans.
Don't recommend this.
No,
Terrible
so
idea.
this is again before we started
It's part of the
reeling
$60,000 of debt.
Yes. And but that wasn't going to start until school started. So we had a whole month where we had rent plus, all the other bills that we had to start paying, no jobs lined up, and we didn't know what to get as far as jobs because we didn't know what our schedules were really going to look like yet and how much of a homework demand and things like that. And so the loans were supposed to be our cushion to, feel it out a little bit before we got that going. And we also sold my car, so we went down to one vehicle, again, to kind of help pay for some things. And we got maybe 3 weeks in, still didn't have our student loans come through, and we were basically down to like pennies in our account. And we had a bill that was coming due like the next 2 days, and we had no idea how we were going to pay for it. And it was probably not even due, but probably like past the grace period even. I mean, we were... At that point, we're like, okay, we're going to start having extra fees, and I don't even remember which bill it was.
I have no idea.
But we ended up getting a call from your grandma, which I somehow we must have set up her address with something for when I have no idea. This makes no sense other than God. But she called and said, hey, I got some mail from you from the electric company, I think it was. And so Brandon's like, hey, will you open it? Figure out what it is. And she said, it's a check. And it was for basically the exact amount that we needed to pay the bills that were coming due, to where we wouldn't be over, go over in our account and have fees and all that. And then pretty much after we paid that bill, then the loan money came in and we were okay. But we got to a kind of a scary point of, did we make a mistake? Are we actually going to survive? Are we going to be able to do this? And God pulled through, because we had been faithful, and we believe that God was, blessing that for sure.
Yeah. So generosity is a huge thing for us, whether it be giving to the church or, supporting kids through, either Compassion International or Children's International. It's important, and it's a blessing to us when we are able to honor God in that way. As we wrap up, I wanted to talk about just a little bit of a piece for finances, like a tip, an encouragement we always give to people who are married and talking about finances in marriage. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that or at least the number one thing that I can think of outside of making sure that you're tithing and putting God first, would be, it is no longer his money and her money. When you guys become married, it is our money. And even when we're budgeting and, going through each week when we get paid and whatnot, there's certain roles that we take when we're doing our budgeting, but still we are talking about all of those things. We are working on it together.
She doesn't write one letter on the register, the checkbook register, and I write the next letter.
No.
One person's filling out the register and all that stuff.
Yeah, and then for us, right now, I don't have an income. I'm staying at home with the kids. You do have an income, so some trap that some couples may fall into is it's his money, and almost I get an allowance in the sense where can I do this? But rather we focus on, this is our money. This is what we get. And then someday when the kids are in school and I do have an income coming in, it'll still be our money. I will not have a separate checking account. He won't have a separate one. And then we have some things shared, because that is a very slippery slope to fall into when you start looking at it as his and hers rather than ours. It can, by looking at it as ours, it builds trust. It builds, just a vulnerability in some ways too. Because you're showing this is, my debt that I bring to the marriage, or like the way that I'm spending things, and all of those kind of things. And so it's really important to have that be a shared, open conversation. And just, I mean, when you get married, you become one, and that should be everything about your lives should become one.
Yeah, and because what we've seen is when it's just like one person is in charge of the finances, the other person just kind of like is aloof and not really knowing, well, I don't have any skills in that, so I just let him or let her do it. That makes all of that weight on one person. And that can, especially when times get tough, that can, which they will, that will get very difficult. And so we're very convicted that if you're married, your finances should be a together thing. And so as we wrap up, we've talked about stewardship, how God is the owner of all things and we're managers. We've talked about budgeting. We've talked about having a plan for your finances, generosity, and just finances and marriage overall. The question that I have for you, just to make this very practical, is do you have a plan for your finances? Do you have an approach that if God were your boss, which he is, and he came to you as the manager of his resources, would you be excited about that conversation, or would you be nervous because you feel like you don't have a plan, you just kind of like willy-nilly flying by the seat of your pants? And that's not to like condemn or anything. It's just a matter of deciding that, okay, we're going to start learning about how to budget, how to be intentional with our finances, how to honor God in the way we manage it. And I would encourage you to check out, if anything, the next step is, if you're married, have a conversation with your spouse, or if you are single, just do this on your own, to both of you or just yourself, go and start looking at budgeting. Like, just learn about it and start considering what that could look like for you. Well, that does it for this episode of The Thrive Show. We're so glad that you joined us. We hope it's been a blessing to you. If it has and you're on YouTube, hit the like button and leave a comment. Let us know. If you're on the podcasting platforms, be sure to leave a review if you haven't already done so. We're really glad that you joined us. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this podcast by First Church of Christ in Bluffton, Indiana. For more information, visit fccfamily.com.